In the heart of a desolate desert, where the sun blazed mercilessly and shadows seemed to twist and writhe under the heat, a small group of travelers found themselves lost, their GPS dead, their maps faded and useless. The eerie stillness was punctuated only by the faint sound of wind whispering secrets through the parched landscape. As night fell, the temperature plummeted, and the once bright stars became an oppressive blanket overhead, casting an unsettling glow on the shifting sands. Just as they were about to make camp, a low, guttural moan echoed through the darkness, sending a chill down their spines. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once, a sound that stirred a primal fear deep within them. They huddled close, eyes darting nervously, every creak of their gear amplifying the tension. One of them, a skeptic, laughed nervously, trying to dismiss the sounds as the wind. But the laughter was hollow, and the others could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. As they settled down, the first watch began, a sense of dread settling over the group like the encroaching night. The landscape transformed the once comforting desert, now felt like a vast, hungry maw, ready to swallow them whole. Shadows danced around the flickering campfire, each movement igniting their imaginations. A figure appeared in the distance, a mirage at first, but as it approached, it morphed into something more sinister, a gaunt silhouette, with sunken eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. Panic surged as it drew closer, the travelers frozen in fear. It seemed to beckon them with bony fingers, whispering in a voice that slithered into their minds, planting seeds of paranoia. One by one, they succumbed to the whispering madness, seeing visions of their deepest fears manifesting in the sand. The night wore on, and reality began to unravel. The desert itself seemed to shift and pulse around them, disorienting their senses. A thick fog rolled in, swallowing the campfire's light, leaving them with nothing but the echo of their own breath and the unsettling feeling of being watched. Friend turned on friend, accusations flying like daggers, each convinced that the others were possessed by the desert's dark spirit. In their hysteria, they failed to notice the ground beneath them began to tremble, the sand shifting like a living thing. It wasn't long before the first of them vanished, dragged beneath the shifting surface with a blood-curdling scream that left the others paralyzed with fear. Desperation clawed at them as they tried to escape, but the desert had a will of its own, a sentient being that reveled in their terror. One brave soul made a run for it, sprinting into the inky blackness, but the sound of their footfalls echoed hollowly, swallowed by the endless expanse. As the screams of their friends faded into the distance, they were met with a sudden silence, the kind that presses down on the soul. The others, gripped by terror, resolved to stand together, forming a circle, trying to stave off the inevitable. They clung to each other, whispering desperate reassurances, but the atmosphere thickened with despair. With each passing hour, the desert seemed to come alive, the sands swirling and whispering tales of those who had come before, lost souls forever wandering. Each traveler could feel their resolve crumbling, the oppressive weight of the unknown pulling at their sanity, dragging them into the depths of the desert's cruel embrace. One by one, they were claimed, consumed by the darkness that thrived on their fear and distrust. The last remaining survivor felt the grip of madness tightening, the boundaries of reality blurring as they stared into the abyss of the desert, where the horizon twisted like a living serpent. Shadows morphed into grotesque figures, laughing silently at their plight, while the ground beneath them seemed to pulse with a heartbeat, eager to reclaim what it had lost. With a final scream that echoed into the void, the last soul was engulfed by the sand, leaving behind only silence and the haunting winds, whispering their names into the eternal night. The desert, now reclaiming its secrets, lay still, waiting for the next unsuspecting wanderers to fall into its terrifying grasp. As the silence settled over the desert, a sense of calm descended, deceptive in its tranquility. The winds shifted, carrying with them the remnants of the traveller's anguish, a haunting echo that curled around the dunes like a lover's embrace. Time lost its meaning, the stars twinkling above like distant, indifferent eyes, oblivious to the horror that had just unfolded. But beneath the surface, the desert pulsed with a dark energy, hungry and watchful, anticipating the arrival of the next group of unwitting souls. Days later, a new party of explorers, seeking adventure and the thrill of the unknown, stumbled upon the abandoned campsite, the remnants of a fire still faintly visible in the sand. They laughed and joked, unaware of the malevolent presence that lurked nearby. As they set up their tents and shared stories of the desert's legends, a faint rustle echoed through the stillness, like a whisper of warning carried on the wind. Ignoring the chill that ran down their spines, they poured themselves drinks, toasted to friendship, and settled in for the night, blissfully unaware of the malevolence that had claimed others before them. As night fell, the atmosphere shifted, the laughter faded, replaced by an oppressive stillness that clung to the air like a shroud. One of the newcomers, a young woman named Sarah, felt an inexplicable pull towards the darkness beyond their firelight, a curiosity that gnawed at her. She wandered away from the group, drawn by a haunting melody that seemed to rise from the earth itself, echoing the fears of those who had come before. As she ventured deeper into the shadows, the desert transformed around her, the sand shifting underfoot like a living carpet, threatening to swallow her whole. Meanwhile, back at the camp, tension grew among the others. They felt a strange sense of disconnection, as if the desert itself was turning them against one another. Suspicion crept in like a serpent, winding its way through their conversations. Whispers of paranoia began to circulate, with accusations flying as they became convinced that Sarah had been taken by some sinister force. The air grew thick with fear, their voices rising in a chaotic chorus, drowning out the desert's ominous murmurs. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night, a sound that was all too familiar. The group froze, terror etched on their faces. They instinctively knew it was Sarah. Without thinking, they sprinted towards the sound, hearts pounding in their chests. The desert felt alive around them, the sands shifting like a living entity, making it hard to find their way. It was as if the landscape itself was playing tricks, leading them deeper into its treacherous embrace. They found Sarah standing alone, her eyes wide and unseeing, her face pale as moonlight. Behind her loomed a figure, shrouded in darkness, its eyes glowing like twin coals, emanating a palpable aura of malevolence. The travelers instinctively reached for one another, forming a desperate circle of protection, but the figure only laughed, a sound that resonated in their bones, echoing the fears they had tried to bury. "Welcome," it hissed, its voice a twisted amalgamation of all the whispers that had ever filled the desert air. "You've come to join the dance of despair, to feed the hunger of the sands." The ground began to tremble, and the shadows lengthened, wrapping around the group like a suffocating blanket. Panic surged, and they turned to run, but the very earth beneath them betrayed them, the sand shifting and pulling at their feet, eager to claim new victims. One by one, the travelers succumbed to the desert's seductive call. Their screams echoed through the night, merging with the howling winds, each cry a note in the symphony of horror. The last few remaining fought against the onslaught, desperately clinging to one another, but the bonds of friendship dissolved in the face of terror. The desert feasted on their fear, feeding the darkness that lurked just beyond their sight. As the final soul was dragged into the depths, the desert fell silent once more, the echoes of their torment dissipating into the void. A cruel stillness settled over the dunes, the figure now standing alone, surveying the desolation with a twisted satisfaction. It had claimed another group, feeding off their terror, their madness, leaving only silence and the whisper of the wind to tell their tale. Days turned into weeks, and the desert lay still, waiting patiently for the next unwary adventurers to stumble upon its cursed sands. The stars watched from above, their light dimming in the face of the darkness that reigned below. And as the sun set each night, a promise lingered in the air, a promise of fear, of despair, and of the unending hunger that lay beneath the surface, eternally waiting to claim the souls of the foolish who dared to wander into its depths. The scary desert would remain, a living entity, a predator cloaked in beauty, a reminder that some places are better left untouched, their secrets buried deep within the sands. The desert's stillness was deceptive, a facade masking the malevolence that lay beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to awaken. As time passed, the remnants of the explorers' camp began to erode, swallowed by the shifting sands. The stories of their fates faded into whispers, lost to the winds, yet the desert held on to their essence, feeding off the echoes of their terror. It was during this time that another group, drawn by tales of lost treasures and ancient mysteries, ventured into the vast expanse. Their excitement masked the subtle warnings carried by the desert winds, and as they set foot on the cursed sands, they unknowingly became pawns in the unfolding horror. The new arrivals, a mix of thrill-seekers and skeptics, quickly dismissed the eerie atmosphere, brushing off the tales of the vanished travelers as mere legend. They established their camp with boisterous laughter, each sound ricocheting off the dunes like a challenge thrown to the lurking darkness. As dusk settled in, a chilling wind swept through the camp, stirring up the dust like fingers probing for forgotten secrets. One of the group, a bold young man named Alex, suggested a game of truth or dare, a misguided attempt to lighten the mood. Little did they know, the game would awaken the dormant fears festering in the desert. As the dares grew increasingly reckless, shadows seemed to stretch longer, darkness wrapping around the group like a living shroud. When it was Alex's turn, he dared himself to venture out into the desert alone, to face whatever lay beyond the circle of their firelight. The others hesitated, a flicker of fear igniting in their eyes, but the bravado in Alex's voice spurred them on. "What's there to be afraid of?" he challenged, laughing as he stepped into the void, the darkness swallowing him whole. Minutes stretched into an eternity, and the others grew anxious, the laughter dying on their lips. They called out for him, but only the wind answered, a low, mournful howl that seemed to mock their concern. Panic began to seep in as the shadows closed around the camp, their laughter replaced by an unsettling silence that pressed against them like a heavy weight. They huddled together, whispering about what might have happened to Alex, their fears spiraling into paranoia. Had he encountered the same fate as those before him? The thought gnawed at their sanity. Then came a low, guttural growl that resonated through the air, sending shivers down their spines. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, approaching from the dark. The group clung to each other, hearts racing as they strained to see into the abyss. Shadows twisted and turned, and just when they thought they could see Alex's outline in the distance, it shifted and morphed into something grotesque, a reflection of their deepest fears manifesting before them. The figure loomed larger, its features obscured by darkness, but its eyes glowed with an insatiable hunger, reflecting their dread back at them. "You've come to play," it whispered, its voice a chilling symphony of despair. "To join the lost," and the damned the words twisted in the air, wrapping around them like chains, paralyzing them with terror. One by one, their courage crumbled, and the illusion of safety shattered as they realized they were not just spectators but participants in a nightmarish ritual. They turned to flee, but the sands shifted beneath their feet, dragging them down, as if the desert itself conspired to keep them there. The shadows danced and lunged, each one a reminder of the souls that had been claimed before them, each one a whisper of the horrors yet to come. Desperation clawed at their throats as they fought against the pull of the earth, but the grip of the desert was relentless, and the night seemed to stretch endlessly. In the fray, they lost sight of one another, swallowed by the chaos that had erupted. One traveler, a young woman named Mia, found herself alone, the cries of her friends fading into the void. She stumbled through the darkness, the ground shifting beneath her as she fought to escape. But the desert was alive, and it called to her, enticing her with the promise of safety and peace if only she would surrender. She hesitated, a flicker of hope igniting within her, but it was quickly extinguished by the reality of her friend's fate. As she plunged deeper into the abyss, the landscape transformed around her, morphing into a twisted reflection of her mind. Visions of her friends flashed before her eyes, their faces contorted in fear, their voices merging into a cacophony of despair. "Join us, Mia," they seemed to plead, their forms reaching out from the shadows, urging her to succumb to the darkness. In that moment, she realized the truth: the desert thrived on fear, feeding off their anguish and despair. It was not just a predator, it was a force of nature, ancient and insatiable, a reminder of the fragility of hope in the face of overwhelming terror. With every ounce of strength she had left, Mia fought against the tide, determined not to let her fate be sealed in the sands. But as she ran, the ground beneath her trembled, the darkness closing in, and the chilling realization settled in this was not just a battle for survival, it was a desperate struggle against a malevolent entity that would stop at nothing to claim her soul. Mia stumbled through the shifting sands, the echoes of her friends' cries ringing in her ears, each step dragging her deeper into the heart of the desert's malevolence. The darkness loomed behind her, pulsating like a heartbeat, eager to reclaim what it had lost. She felt the weight of despair pressing down, an invisible force trying to pull her back, but the flicker of survival ignited within her. She couldn't let the desert win. In a last-ditch effort, she turned and faced the void. "I won't be another victim," she shouted, her voice breaking the suffocating silence. The figure in the shadows paused, as if surprised by her defiance. The eyes that glowed like embers narrowed, revealing a flicker of annoyance amidst the hunger. With renewed determination, Mia called upon every ounce of courage she had, refusing to succumb to fear. "You don't own me. You can't take me." The ground trembled violently beneath her, the sands swirling in a chaotic frenzy as the desert raged at her defiance. But with each declaration of her will, she felt the bonds of despair loosening, the darkness retreating slightly, as if her words were light piercing through the night. The shadows around her writhed, their forms shifting in anger, but Mia pressed on, envisioning her friends' faces, remembering their laughter and their hopes. The winds began to howl, but this time it was not a mournful cry. It felt like the tempest of a storm, charging against the darkness. The desert itself seemed to react, the sand swirling and rising, forming a barrier between Mia and the encroaching figure. "I choose to live," she screamed, summoning the strength of her spirit. With one final surge, she dashed towards the remnants of the campfire, the only source of light left in this expanse of darkness. As she reached the flickering flames, the fire roared back to life, casting a warm glow that pushed against the shadows. The figure shrieked, its form twisting and contorting, the light exposing its true nature, a mass of anguish and despair, writhing in a futile attempt to regain its power. "Begone," Mia cried, her voice a fierce command. The fire flared, and with it, a shockwave of energy radiated outward, pushing against the darkness, unraveling the bonds of fear that had held her captive. The desert shuddered, the malevolence retreating, drawn back into the depths of the sands, as if repelled by the very essence of her courage. In that moment, the landscape began to change. The oppressive weight of the darkness lifted, the stars twinkling once more overhead like guardians of the night. The whispers faded into silence, and the ground beneath her stabilized. Mia, breathless and trembling, looked around, her heart pounding, realizing she was alone but alive. The campfire crackled, casting long shadows across the desert, and for the first time the stillness felt peaceful, a gentle reminder of her triumph. She knew that the desert was still there, lurking just beyond the edges of light, waiting for the next unwitting souls to wander into its embrace. But Mia had escaped, a testament to the power of hope and defiance in the face of overwhelming terror. With one last glance back into the dark, she took a deep breath, steeling herself for the journey ahead. She would tell the tale of the scary desert, of the lost souls, and the darkness that thrived on fear. And she would ensure that the whispers of warning would be heard by those who dared to approach. With her heart set on survival, she turned and walked away from the haunting sands, carrying with her the strength forged in the fires of her fear, a light that would never be extinguished.